Welcome to Newb Perspectives. This is episode 7.
Woo!
So many.
Yeah, we are going to be talking about session 0 today, with the overarching question, how do you do a session 0? I think before we get into anything, we should probably discuss what is a session 0.
Yeah, for those of you who might not know or not fully understand it.
So who wants to explain what a session 0 is to our the uninitiated?
Well, I've only recently started playing RPGs, but as I've experienced it so far, it's essentially the session before you start any campaign. It helps you create your character, understand the group, understand the system you're playing in, and it's kind of just a moment to prepare yourself for what's to come.
Yeah, it's preparation and then vibe check.
Yeah.
Very fair. Mm-hmm. And I think definitely part of it as well is not only just understanding kind of the system and the characters, but also the world that you're going to be going into and kind of what it involves and pertains.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and how you'll fit into it.
Yeah.
Which is definitely important in a otherworldly sort of thing, like in a fantasy or a science fiction. If you're doing more of like a modern thing, you don't necessarily need to do it as much.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a world like explanation, right? If you're just like, hey, it's a big city in North America, or you know what they're talking about, generally speaking.
You're in New York, like active current New York. That's...
Yeah.
Cool.
I played a game that was active Toronto. It was essentially Toronto, but you had like fantasy elements, like vampires and werewolves were a thing.
okay.
So the city was divided,
Oh.
and so you had to like figure out like the borders and which side you'd live on.
Who got Scarborough?
I don't remember.
It was the werewolves. It's important that you don't expect to play
Oh, yeah.
at session 0.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You're not getting into anything.
Yeah, like it's called session 0 for a reason. Like it's before the playing.
Before session 1.
Exactly. Like you won't be like, making any actions or anything. I was about to say you won't be rolling any dice, but some people roll dice for their stats and stuff, and that would happen at session 0.
Yeah.
Or just to hear them clack.
Or just to hear them clack. That's true.
Which is, definitely an interesting element of character creation in that regard is
Rolling for dice.
rolling for stat or not.
Yeah. I think we'll talk more about that a little bit later on.
Yeah.
As Tori points at our lesson or our prompt notes. So now that we know what a session 0 is, getting to know the characters, the world, the setting, each other, even especially if you're playing with people who you haven't played with before.
Mm-hmm. Very fair.
Right? Like, I think a lot of our campaigns have had a lot to do with, like, we've played, like, we've known each other before we played the game.
100%.
Sometimes we brought new people in.
I was one of those people one time.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so, it's a good idea to sort of have that session 0 to get to know the people as people, too.
Fair.
Yeah.
It's definitely something I've had a lot less experience with because most of the time, I think for almost all of my groups, I've known everyone involved. I think there's been one or two times where there was one person that one of us brought in kind of as like a friend or something for a while that I didn't quite know, but
yeah.
I've been the new person in most of mine.
Yeah, I've been the new person quite a lot.
I think it's also really common now that online games are becoming more common.
Yeah.
People doing like LFGs on like social media, Reddit.
Getting in there with
Explain that
Discord.
acronym to me.
LFG, looking for game.
group.
Oh.
Or looking for
Or
group.
looking for group.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, kind of the whole online side of it, or just even remote side of it, between just being able to really just jump into kind of campaigns with people you really have never met, probably never will,
Yeah,
might be on the
exactly.
other side of the world,
Yeah. Having that session 0 to get to know people is really, really important.
Totally.
Something that I didn't write down in our prompt notes, but something that should take place at a session 0 is when you're getting to know the people, get to know what they are and aren't comfortable with in a game.
Oh,
Fair.
yeah.
Which is really for the DM more than anything, very critical. 100%, everyone needs to be aware of that, but that's definitely one of those, as a DM, you need to be very aware of that within your group of people, because there are certain things that will cause triggers for certain people or have
Yeah.
issues with certain, like certain people, have issues with certain topics, and you have to make sure as a DM you're not building that into a world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the kind of place where you set up, if you have a system like Veils.
What
that
is
kind of-
Veils?
Veils, it's Veils and something else, and I don't remember because I've never used it. But it's essentially you have a strict list of Veils, which is things that exist in the world and are mentioned but aren't described in detail.
Right.
And then the other category is things that will not come up or exist or be mentioned at all.
Oh yeah,
Fair.
yeah. I had a DM for my Blades in the Dark campaign, and they started off, and it was really nice. They actually sent a link to a survey to everyone,
Yeah.
and in there you described like you got to click off the boxes of there's this topic, how involved do you want it to be in the campaign, and that's either like it's not talked about at all, or it's like talked about but not in detail, and like the veils like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that was established and the DM saw the results, they like sent out to everyone what the topics that won't be covered
Sort of like
are.
the results of the
Yeah.
survey. Yeah.
Yeah.
To make sure everyone was on the same page about what is not going to be explicitly said and what's going to be kept out.
And it's also nice in that sense because then it's not like being pinned on specific people. Because as I guess shitty as it is, there are times where people will then like, get annoyed at certain people and wow, like can't cover this because this person doesn't want to deal with it and whatnot,
Yeah.
which is always just really shitty to kind of do that to people. But there are people that will do that, especially in like large, completely like open online sessions where you
Yeah.
don't really know who's kind of coming in. You can definitely get people
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that's why the surveys are so good to keep it anonymous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, I did something like that for the start of the campaign that I'm running right now with you guys. I didn't do an online survey, but I think that
Most of us know each
most
other.
of us were all comfortable enough
Yeah.
with each other to say what we are and aren't comfortable with. I didn't use that system, but like in name, but we kind of did like what it is.
Similar idea.
Yeah. Like we talked about how we're not going to be doing certain things. Like we're not going to be doing, like if there's a torture scene or something, like I'll just be like, and then your character gets tortured and roll fort save or something.
Yeah, we're not going to
Yeah.
go into graphic explanations.
Because we as a group, we decided that it was possibly a interesting thing to happen to a character and how they could deal with that in their life, and whatever like post-traumatic stress could come from that, could be an interesting story element, but we didn't want to have to deal with the graphic elements of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, we did decide that a lot of graphic elements are okay.
Yep.
Like the elements of combat where violence is
Oh yeah.
a
Describing
thing.
your finishing move.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
As
someone who explicitly plays
Yeah.
a barbarian who grew up and only trained in arena fighting, there is a lot of glory kills in terms
Exactly.
of how they function. And
Yeah, and I think that the fact that we were able to separate those two things, so we weren't just like, okay, no descriptions of gore at all or whatever, and
Yeah.
it's like, I think the context is important,
Very
and
much so.
something that you should think about when you're talking to your players or players talking to each other. And that's why I think it's important for the players to also know about it, right? So that the players don't describe these things in person. So it's
Yeah.
good that your GM sent it to all the players too.
Yeah.
So that the GM's not just like, okay, I won't set up this scene. Because the players may take things in ways that you don't want them to or don't expect them
players
to.
will
Yeah.
always take things.
There also had to be something altered because originally the majority voted that they didn't want like racist undertones, like racism, to be like a part of the story.
Okay.
However, certain characters like set up in like the backgrounds of the races in the Blades in the Dark world had certain like story elements to them, and players wanted that to be an integral part of their story and their character motivation.
Right.
And so the DM had to like talk to everyone and like modify the guidelines so that the people could still have the stories they wanted while maintaining like boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The system is called Lines and Veils, by the way.
Lines
There
and
we go.
veils.
Okay.
I googled it.
I've never
Excellent.
heard of it.
No, it makes sense, the name, right?
Totally.
Like, don't cross the line, but the veil is like you can sort of see it, but can't.
There's other systems too. Like I heard of one that's like a stoplight sort of system where it's like
Yeah.
green is fine, but you can switch the color if you're becoming uncomfortable, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
I use something like that. I've heard of people use something like that in their games. I've never used it because, like we've talked about, we all are like really close friends in our games. I've never played an online game with strangers, but I can imagine that it could be super useful to just like have open DMs as a DM for your players to be able to message you privately if there's something happening that they are uncomfortable with,
Totally.
so that they don't have to say it to the whole group. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pretty clear difference in like how a DM needs to like prepare and set up for a session, because they have to take into account all of these factors when they're building their campaign and how they want to run it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of how do you prepare, so let's talk about how as players you prepare for a session 0.
That's fair. You want to go?
Sure. Oh god. I guess part of preparing is complying with what your DM is asked and expected of you. I feel like if I'm supposed to come in with like a rough idea of a character, or like more of a firm idea of a character, then I have to account for that. But usually I need some idea of what I want to play and how I want to like go into this game. I will admit though, sometimes I've gone to session 0s and had no idea about my character, and so that's why it's like another helpful thing to see what other people are playing and see how you could fit in with the group.
I think that that's fine if every other person is prepared. If everyone is in that boat,
Yeah.
session 0 can take a long time and longer than it maybe needs to.
And at points, like, not even succeed
Yeah.
at like, really preparing a lot of stuff, because it ends up with kind of just, rather than how people are going to kind of interact with each other and, what they're going to do and kind of learning about the world, it just kind of becomes like, oh, well, like, I wanted to, I wanted to do something melee, but I'm not sure, but you're all doing something like that, and we should probably have someone arrange, but then I could do that, but I don't really want to do that, and then everyone's kind of, it just becomes a kind of, what are we doing for the entire session, which is fine, but it doesn't really accomplish a lot of that kind of goal of how you're going to kind of work together, and necessarily, like, how you fit into the world and everything else that you really kind of want to try to get figured out.
Something that that maybe I could interject a little bit about how the GM prepares for session 0, because I think it interacts with how the players prepare. Because at least how I prepare for the session 0 as a GM, and how I've heard other people do it, is when you so you have like your world set up and all that stuff, and we're gonna talk about like building the world and stuff like that in a different episode probably, because I think that deserves its own episode. But you should have like a brief, I guess, for the players to know what's gonna happen, so you or like basic, very general idea of what the game's gonna be about, right? Is it gonna be like a story driven game and you're gonna try and like the end goal is to fight a dragon, or is your game going to be like like knowing the genre is really important, right? You can't go into session 0 not knowing the genre of the game, which,
Very true.
If you're playing in a system like Pathfinder, for example, the genre is already pretty laid out for you. It's a fantasy, like a high fantasy role-playing game, whatever. But some systems, like Fate, for example, they're general games that you could play in any time period, any genre, any setting. So you can't just say to your players, hey, we're going to play some Fate on Thursday.
To be fair,
be ready.
To be completely fair, technically, the creation of the world is part of session 0 for Fate.
Well,
it's supposed to be,
yes,
by the rules of the book,
Yes.
fully collaborative for the whole group.
Yes, but I think that it's important to know,
At least ideas.
at least have the genre, because if you have like, let's say you have the GM and 4 players, that's pretty standard number of players, and you have like 3 of them are like, I think I'm looking for a fantasy game, and the other ones are like, I want something sci-fi, and all of a sudden those two clash when you're supposed to be making your characters in the world together.
Yeah, but the first thing you do is agree on what you're doing.
Yeah, but I think that you should agree on what you're doing before the game starts. Like, before Session 0 happens.
Session 0 is before the game starts. Like,
well, no, before
if you're playing
Session
something
0,
like Fate, the entire creation of the world happens at the table.
Yes, I know that.
Including the genre of the game. That applies also to a lot of Apocalypse World-style games.
I think to a degree, but I don't think you can go to a game without having some idea of what you want to play. Like, you wouldn't, like, sit down and be like...
You have an idea of what you want to play, but, like, to have some things already in place isn't always true.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean in terms of, like, building the world.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have the idea of the world and the story or anything like that, but you have, like, a rough idea of there's going to be guns, or there's going to be, like...
a superhero game.
Yeah, like, in space or not in space.
Or, like,
having a generalized idea of at least a themed concept, or at least something.
Yeah.
Because because there's also to the degree that when it comes to that kind of stuff, like you obviously, like, it's about kind of getting, you know, the world built and the characters built and everything kind of together on those, in like certain systems like that specifically. But there are also points where, like, if there's so little done, like, there may then just be points where it's like, you know, some people are coming in because they think it's one thing, and you're like, Session 0 is normally about kind of like getting everything made and getting everything set up, and if you come in and then like it's decided midway through Session 0 that it's like, oh, well, this is going to be like all space themed, and someone was like, well, like, I really came in here because I wanted to do sci-fi, I don't want to do space, they might then just not even be joining your campaign anymore, and you're just...
It's not really halfway through.
Well, no, but the point is like, usually at least having some baselines so players know that, like, this is something I want to play in, and then can really build the world and stuff together, versus coming in with the premise of, I'm going to play an RPG, period, with no knowledge. It might not be something that they want to play, and then you're kind of losing players, then needing to get a new Session 0 to get new people in so that they're part of the process. At least having a baseline, generalized conceptual idea is probably a good thing to still have. Like, don't flush it out, don't plan anything with it, but like, have a vague idea to make sure all the players are into that, and it's not just like, cool, one or two of the people just don't want to play that.
So with that being in mind, the GM's homework for Session 0 being at least a
varied based off system.
Very based off system, and also very, like, loose in general for some systems, but some systems being more specific.
Totally.
But basically knowing what kind of game they're gonna run.
And I think you mentioned another really important point was, again, like, just the goal of it to a degree in some of them. Because, like, there have also been ones where, like, for one of the Pathfinder campaigns I run currently, like, in terms of, like, getting the world set up, I, like, you know, we had spent months before that getting an entire world set up, and, like, had already done a ton of world building around this. And as we were kind of getting into one of the later stages, and we were kind of hitting Session 0 to see really where to kind of then, like, tune the world to, we had that kind of conversation, because, like, what is the goal for this? Like, what is your end condition? What, to you as a party and kind of as a group, do we want to say the win is? Which, for that, it was ultimately decided that there was none. And at the end of the day, they just kind of wanted to just kind of explore and see what was there and see what was going on, and just kind of ride between thing to thing as, you know, they kind of saw fit and as it was happening. Which
is a world builder's dream goal for players in their world.
Oh yeah,
or a nightmare, depending.
Or a nightmare. For us, it's definitely a dream. I love that kind of style where I can really just kind of go crazy and just kind of go however you feel like, and can swap between plot ideas. But it also is a ton of work, knowing that, you know, standardly, if your campaign's goal is to go get the dragon, and the players set up around that, and I mean, you can set up all the things you need to around there, and that's kind of their main line. Sure, they might go into the sides a bit, but, like, you're still the main line, versus there are points where they've finished off one quest line in our campaign, and it's like, cool, I genuinely don't even know how to prepare as a GM, because they could literally do anything.
Yeah.
And there's no, like, it's a blessing, and it can also be a curse, and just in terms of how much work it takes to provide that kind of thing. But yeah, I think having that kind of goal set, though, in mind, and kind of what that is also very important to establish in kind of that early session, as it will very heavily pertain to you as a GM for the rest of the entire campaign, however long it is, and what you're signing up for.
Yeah, and how the players make their characters.
Totally.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're like, okay, we're gonna run a module that the goal is this thing, right? And the players would then have to make characters that make sense to want to do that thing, or at least make sense to be in that setting.
If the campaign's goal is, topple the evil overlord that's, ruling this entire area of the kingdom, and you play someone who's terrified of blood and doesn't want to fight, it's like, wow, that's...
Or worse, you play
gonna
one
be
of their
pretty hard.
minions.
Yeah, it's like, that's gonna be really hard to fit into that campaign goal. You're gonna have a very hard time with that character.
Or say, you come up with this idea that you're gonna have like some sort of rat drug ring,
Right.
And hypothetically
Who would
speaking,
do that?
Definitely not done a campaign around that.
Definitely not. And then someone decides that they want to come in and do something completely different. That could,
it can be harder.
It could be hard to make those stories mesh for the GMs and for the players to sort of, work together on that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's also possibilities of like adjusting characters. I played a superhero character who could read minds but was super anxious about their ability to do that. And so I wanted to be useful. I wanted obviously to use the ability to read minds and control. I think I could control minds too. Yeah. And so I just flavored it that whenever they got super anxious, their emotions heightened and they inadvertently activated their powers. So you can like flavor it if it might not like directly seem fit.
Yeah.
So to sort of tie us all together, the player's homework. So the GM's homework, we discussed, certain systems it's going to be different, but in general you need to know the genre of your game. And you might need to know more of what the story is going to be about depending on what kind of game you're running.
Yeah, you also need to set expectations for your players.
Yeah,
like, give them guidelines.
So that's sort of like, that's like the during session 0, right? Like that's the setting expectations. That's sort of what session 0 is all about. If you could summarize it in 2 words, it's set expectations.
Yeah.
Put that on a t-shirt.
There you go. If Now we need to talk about what the players have to do before session 0 starts.
I think, again, it kind of a little bit similarly to the GM, kind of does depend on the system.
For sure.
But I think at least at a baseline, having some kind of generalized, or even just like a couple ideas, so you have a bit of flexibility on just kind of what you are looking to do and what you kind of want to accomplish and what you want to really be as a character. Because like at the end of the day, you're going to be role playing as this for the next however many sessions based on campaigns. We've had ones run for years, and so it's like you really kind of want to get an idea of what you want to be doing and how you want to kind of interact with that.
Yeah,
I think it's important to not come in incredibly like rigid. Like there's times where you come in and like everything is already like 100% done and you're just showing up to session 0 for the sake of like talking with other people.
Here's my character sheet, DM. No, don't do that.
Like
some people do that.
And I think that some people do that, and like you said, I think it's too
an
rigid.
option. Yeah,
I think as long as you come with like an open mind.
Yeah.
I just think coming with a printed character sheet may send a message that
you're doing what you're doing, and it doesn't really matter what the rest of the group thinks or what the rest of the group like. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Because having at least like a little bit of flexibility, like there's definitely times where I've come in with like like a more or less like pretty solidified idea, but then it's always kind of down to then like the different people are doing different things, and like sometimes like I could see how like mine could mesh in with someone else's, and if I make like a few tweaks it could like kind of make a better overall group setup, or it could make more sense in like backstories, or kind of have some things kind of put in. So kind of coming in with that definite like idea as to what you're doing. Like you could not have an idea, but I think as you'd kind of mentioned earlier, you really got to hope if you're doing that you're the only one, because if everyone's coming in without an idea, it's going
it could take
nowhere
longer.
fast.
I always show up with character creation with a small compendium of ideas that would fit.
Yeah, like
the setting.
And you want to have like broad strokes, right? Like you want to be like, oh, I'm gonna be like a mercenary, or I want to be a fighter, or I want to be a wizard, or I want to be a net runner, and the all of the like details, like as important as those details are, can be fleshed out during character creation and during session 0.
Yeah. And I think it can also, the one other side, I guess I would say that I guess is kind of more towards that beginning of not necessarily coming in with anything, but potentially even if you are really open. I have also come into character creations where it's like a new system, like when we did with Cyberpunk, where it's kind of like, cool, I don't really understand much of this system, so I don't really have a preference in terms of what I play, and I'm kind of just down to, and it also, I guess for me, it helped that like I knew at least most of the other people in the group did have some at least general idea of what they wanted to, and I was more or less fine coming in being like, cool, you know what, I'm just gonna like find a gap where we could use something, and I'm down to fill whatever that gap is, and I'll craft something.
Sometimes you
around
look around and you realize that no one here has any idea how to use computers in the sci-fi world.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, I feel like we should have some knowledge on that.
And sometimes you don't account for things. Like sometimes you're halfway through a campaign, you realize no one who's here has any idea how to survive in the wild, and now we're stuck in the wild.
And now you're stuck in the tall grass.
Yeah. Oh no. It does happen, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we have been talking a lot about the job of players, job of GM at the session 0. We have also been talking about collaboration at the table at session 0 before, stats are created, before classes are decided, all of that jazz, depending on the system, whatever. Some RPGs don't specify that it's a part of the game to do collaboration during session 0. Some do, like Fate, like you mentioned, Bubblegum Shoe does it. All Evil Hat games do it. World of Darkness games do it. Before I'd ever played an Evil Hat game, before I ever played a game where collaboration was explicit in the rules, we had some experiences where sometimes our party members didn't necessarily get along super well, and that can sometimes derail a campaign, especially for newer role players, right? Like, I think it was the second campaign that we'd ever played in, was one that was ran by Tori. That was the second campaign that I'd ever played in, anyways. I think, Leah, you played in a couple more, and I think, Sarah, this was
my first?
Your first, yeah. And there were some character interactions where we got in some scuffles because we built some characters that didn't play well together based on their backstories because we didn't have that collaboration because we were, like I said, we were new to the whole idea.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you end up in a situation. It's just so much easier to play a game where all the players have like an ingrained reason to care about each other.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's so easy just to. The situation happened. I no longer care about that character.
Yeah.
It's hard to be motivated to follow their storylines when they come up, and it's just not really fair to everyone.
It's just easier, and sometimes it can just make some players themselves not happy with the game.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Honestly, I think in that campaign, I thought our characters were going to be like buds because we both lived in the forest. But then by the end of it,
you attacked him in the street, Sarah.
You did. You
oh, I
tackled
did
him. Sarah, that was session 1. I think it was.
I don't
Session
think
1.
I don't think it was session.
Yeah, no,
it was not session 1.
It was session
we
2.
came back. It was
It's on the way.
Sessions in.
On the way back from the.
You're right. Yeah.
City.
On the way back. Yeah. Sarah's character tackled my character because I wouldn't wait for you to.
You wouldn't wait. That was not polite.
I think you were like, your character was like tying their shoe or something.
No,
dumb.
I think I wanted to go back to the forest or something. I don't remember what.
No, it was not me. It was not just me that wasn't waiting.
We were all leaving.
Yeah, I don't remember what it
to
was.
Go talk to the king.
Everyone was waiting, and then it was just you.
I convinced you because you wanted to seduce the king. That in order to do it, you had to bring in like a gift or something.
Okay.
And you wanted to go get the gift, and I was like, no, we're not getting the gift, that's dumb.
Oh yeah, and then I was insulted and mad that you wouldn't wait for me to get the gift, so I attacked you.
So you
So
tackled me.
that was our downfall, quite literally.
Um,
It landed me in the slammer, and it also landed our relationship in
Yeah,
a
you
sad
started
place.
just attacking people in the streets. Guards were not very happy with that.
Well, it wasn't really an attack.
well, you know, it was
Attack
definitely an
rolls
assault.
may have been done.
It was definitely an assault.
Yeah.
But the
No, it was
and,
bad.
and then when we were trying to, my character in that campaign was like super stealthy, like ranger person.
No, this example.
This example. And then to add on to it, my character was already like, don't like this person very much. And then we tried to do like a stealth raid of some sort of like hideout for somewhere.
Yeah.
I forget what the organization was called, but it was like the big bad evil guy organization.
Yep.
And so we were gonna do a stealth raid of it, and then Sarah's character shows up drunk.
Yup.
Several of us were drunk.
Yep. And then she just like stumbles into the house, just like, "Hey guys."
Yeah. I don't think it was ever actively communicated to my character that it was stealthy,
It was pretty well communicated.
and
to
they
him.
were drunk, so
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
wanted to help.
So like it totally made sense why Sarah played her character this way, and it definitely
Yeah.
added to the drama of the situation, which was very fun.
Oh, it was. I tried making friends with the people at the door, and they just wanted me to leave. I tried to give them chalk as a gift, because chalk is like one of the things that comes with the default adventurer's kit. And I'm like, have this.
Yeah,
And they
you
really
ended up
didn't
giving
want
me as a gift as a pumpkin.
Yeah.
Who, for reference, was a Leshy pumpkin.
Was playing an animate
I was
pumpkin.
a pumpkin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did not just dress a dwarf up or something as a pumpkin.
No, I was a literal
No,
pumpkin.
was a literal pumpkin. Yeah.
Oh my God, such a
So
great
sometimes it's important to have characters have intertwined backstories, which
Yeah.
is something that Fate does that I think I'm going to use in every single game I play from now on.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Have the way that Fate does it for those people who haven't played is everyone sort of writes like a paragraph or two of like an adventure that they had before the campaign starts, and then from there they every other person, or I think it's like two other people sort of put themselves in your adventure, whether they're helping you or hindering you. Not necessarily. Usually they're not hindering you on purpose. I think one of ours was like, they saw someone stealing something, so they called the cops on that person or something, and that was like that hurt them, but obviously they were not doing it to harm that specific person because they
feel
didn't
like
know them.
Doing it the way Fate does it can also cause strife, because when we played Fates, the relationship between me and Tori was that I was a drug runner and he almost caught me at
Correct.
the border.
Yes.
And that didn't become a thing because he never realized that it was me during
Correct.
Yeah.
the game that we were playing. But if it had, it wouldn't have ended well.
It would not have.
No, but I think it
That instance maybe
yeah.
not as great, but
Yeah.
the idea
the
as a
idea
whole.
of yeah.
It as a whole is a
And
good
I think
idea.
that I like I said, I think that you should try and limit it to unobtrusive negative things if they are negative, and if they are helpful. Like for example, Tori and I were on like a mission together at one point. Like we were doing some fight thing. I don't know what some aliens were involved. There was
They always are.
Yep. And that brought our characters closer together and a reason.
I rescued you.
Exactly. Yes. And then our characters had a reason to
Work together
and care about each other throughout the campaign, even if we were not doing our specific mission. Like Tori's character cared about my backstory, my character cared about his backstory, and we sort of were able to work together.
That's very good. It's good to force everyone to integrate, because I played in a game once where 4 of the people playing, the GM and 3 of the players, already knew each other, and 2 other people came in to start a campaign. So we ended up in a situation where the 3 players who knew each other had integrated backstories,
Right.
and then the 2 other people had separate integrated backstories.
That's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the best.
Yeah, it's good to have that like web backstories working together. So like at any point, it's not just like separate groups like that for sure.
Yeah.
Because the fate system could have that exact same problem that you mentioned, right? They could be just like, oh, you know, I'll integrate with this person, and they just somehow two groups are formed. So it's important to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's great for integrating yourself with the other characters, and it's also good for integrating yourself with your own character's mindset. Because not only do you have to create the story of what you did before the campaign started, but you also have to think, okay, here are other people's story. How would my character be there, and what would they do?
Yeah.
So it's just a good way to think about your character's mental state.
Totally.
Also, it's a good way, like you said, to think about your character's mental state. So what they might, you know, why they're adventuring, right? Because there's this general conceit in role-playing games that your characters are going to be active participants in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So it helps you build that why they're an active participant thing.
100%.
Throughout the session.
And can definitely kind of relate then for the rest of the campaign how you interact with it and like in what kind of ways.
Yeah, which is not to say your characters have to be static.
Oh gosh. No.
But they and they have to perform the same actions every time they interact with the same thing. But it can inform you as you're starting to get to know your own character.
Yeah, it can. It also lets other people know the vibe of your character, because if you even if you have the same goal, if your characters are going to go about it in very different ways, that can cause also different issues. Like in the evil campaign we played that you weren't in, Sarah, we ended half the people.
We should do another one of those.
It's very fun. Half the people were playing characters who wanted to be evil because they wanted like either like fame or they wanted like to rule, and they went about it chaotically and violently. And then there was a different player who was there who wanted to go about being evil more strategically,
quietly,
more
subterfuge.
Yeah. Subterfuge is the correct word.
Yeah.
And anyways, it didn't work out.
Yeah, the rest of us.
Imagine it would.
The rest of us interpreted evil as violent and chaotic and whatever.
Straight up, not like, oh, I'm gonna try to get involved with your city and then help out so that I can slowly corrupt it. It was more just like, cool, there's a city. Let's just start burning the first building we can see and find if it carries to the rest of them.
The difference between white collar and blue collar evil.
Exactly. The rest of us were that blue collar evil, and the one person was the white collar. And they ended up getting pretty frustrated with a lot of our character decisions.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Sometimes, in character, to you, it looked like he was befriending the local guard.
Yeah, which did not make any sense at all, because I was there to
Steal
kill
their
the
walls.
local guard and
Steal their walls.
and steal their walls. Yes, I was trying to steal walls. That was my character's main goal, was to have walls that were his.
I think he wants a home.
Well, he wanted the walls to be big and made of stone. I'm not going to get into his backstory right now, but it was a mess. But yeah, he wanted walls. That was funny. I think your character was an animate gun.
Yep.
That wanted,
sentient gun.
Yeah.
Sentient gun that just
not
wanted
animate,
to steal
sentient.
souls for the gods.
Yeah.
Wow.
I told my patron.
Sounds pretty anime.
I went to my patron and I was like, I want the power to be able to kill the people, and he's like, I can turn you into like a perfect killing machine. And I was like, oh yeah, give me that power. And then he just formed me into a gun, and I was like, oh,
the perfect killing machine without legs.
You don't need legs to kill.
And it was like, oh I guess that works. But
how did you create bullets?
I didn't.
Eldritch Blast.
Oh, that checks
I
out.
was a warlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that was a D&D campaign, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, so collaboration important.
Yes, collaboration is important. Now, moving on to the mechanics of character creation.
Totally.
What is step one in character creation for you? Let's start with Leah.
Step one for character creation for me is concept. Step two is, well,
I didn't
most
ask
of
for
the time.
step two.
Sorry, fine. I'll stop here.
You're getting step two.
The end of my sentence.
Take it and enjoy it.
Okay. What is
It's step two. It's not anything bad.
Yeah, but tone is important.
Well,
so.
yeah.
What is step 2?
Really, the way I go about making characters is I try my best to create character concepts around mechanics that already exist in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which I find a lot easier
Mm-hmm.
to create characters given the constraints of the game than I
Mm-hmm.
do to come up with a concept that I could imagine and then try to fit it into the game that
Totally.
wasn't made
Yeah.
to hold that concept.
Right.
Yeah, just not prepared.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, what do you think?
I'm pretty much the same as Leah, especially because I'm more new to different RPG systems. I start by understanding the character types or the classes or whatever it is that the game uses, and then I see what kind of just stands out to me the most, and from that I think, can I build a fun character out of this? Like, what ideas can I make? And then I build a fun backstory, and then all the mechanics follow.
Okay. So you sort of, so you start with the broad strokes, but still rules-based broad strokes.
Yeah.
And then you do, okay, that makes sense.
To be fair, there are some games where it's easier to do it the other way around, where
Yeah.
you have a character concept and then you make the game. Like, if you play the Burning Wheel and you try to look at every possible option for characters,
Heck
it's
no.
going to take you 10 years.
There's
Yeah,
like
it'd be there
30
forever.
pages of that, more than that, probably like 100 pages of just like
Yeah.
the traits.
Oh,
Just
but
the traits.
so much fun to build the character. Like,
Oh,
if
it
you
is,
do
yeah.
have the concept.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to make a rat lady who owns a brothel.
Say, like hypothetically.
Hypothetically, if that was, like, what your motivation was. You
Yeah.
could do it, and she'd be great.
Yeah. I think I would definitely agree in the way it's kind of concept first, but I think I'm a lot less like of the kind of concept first within the rule system. I think I just kind of try to think of what would be interesting. Like, what would be an interesting character, what would be an interesting setup. I'll maybe take like kind of like a running point from like the rule set in the way of like I'll start with like a class idea or something. Like I'll start like a little bit grounded, but like I definitely will kind of do a lot more of the conceptualized side of it, and then try to then build the stats and the rule support kind of around that with whatever the game offers.
That's similar to sort of what Sarah was
Yeah.
saying then, yeah. I feel like we have like this continuum where Leah looked like she was starting more with the rules. And then sort of worked our way, and so I tend to ignore the rules until I have to pay attention to them. So, which is funny as the person who more often GMs than not. I tend to make my characters, and when I make my characters, I think about the what I want them to do, and then I try and find mechanics in the game that piece them together that fit it.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a mechanic that fits it, I'll still like flavor it that way. And so it's like, say I can't create a rat person who runs a brothel in my game. I might,
sad.
like, hypothetically speaking, I would still do that and pick the mechanics that like support me rules based wise. But I would still play up the other parts in the game.
They just don't have a lot of...
They won't have the support with the rules.
Correct.
Yeah,
They
you
just
have to
won't...
compensate with role playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I tend to like systems that allow me to do that more. Like the Burning Wheel, like Fate, like is it too early for a plug?
No, go for it. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Like my friend Tyler's system that he's developing.
Yeah, like Metroville. Like it's very open form, where I find Pathfinder and D&D to be a little bit more... It's weird to call D&D restrictive with how many options there are, but the fact is there aren't infinite options like there are in some other types of games. So in that way it's more mechanics focused, and I tend to be less mechanics focused. The only reason the mechanics exist in my character creation are to make sure that my character functions in the game after we start the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But yeah, it's like I think that all of these are valid options for ways to create the character, and one that we don't necessarily do, but I think that some people do, and we've played with people who have done this, is they look at the book and they're like, this is the thing I want to do. Like, I want to be a two-handed fighter. I'm going to be that two-handed fighter, and I'm going to create a character that would be a two-handed fighter because they see a mechanic that they really like in the game.
Which is also a completely valid way to go
Yeah,
about
for
it.
sure.
I've done that for certain characters in the past.
Yeah.
It's definitely not my common go-to Bunny's Ranch, but like I've definitely done it in the past.
I've done that.
Yeah.
It's a good way of grounding yourself in the character creation process because you have a clear goal,
Yeah.
and it's easier to alter towards that thing that already exists in the rules.
Totally.
You can anchor yourself to a concept too. Like if you start
Well,
with a concept,
yeah, but-
I want to be a pirate.
Well, yeah, but I think Sarah's right in that it's easier to ground yourself to the rules, and that, like, especially as a new player, if you haven't played in the system before, you can have something to attach to, rather than like this concept that you need to make sense of in the various parts of the rulebook. Right? You pick a part of the rulebook that you like, and then you build the character concept based on that.
I think the other way is very valid.
No, I'm not saying it's not valid. I'm just saying that I think it might be easier for new players. Because when I was a new player, that's what I did too. Right? My very first character, I picked a class and a race that I liked, and then I came up with a backstory.
Yeah, as did I. And then I realized I created the character not optimally, which is fine.
Which, yeah, that's totally fine. That's
I
another
guess
thing that we can
It's
talk
different
about.
because when I started playing games, I started with games that don't have class and race
Right,
options.
like
Yeah.
what
Oh,
game? What
yeah.
was your first game?
The Sprawl.
Yeah, exactly,
Ooh,
like a
yeah.
World of Darkness game, right?
Yeah.
And my first game was D&D. My second game was Pathfinder.
Same.
I was the inverse.
Yeah, so exactly. So we're like very much like the D20 like tactical role playing games. I call them tactical role playing games because fighting is like a big part of those games.
Yeah.
And so your class and race and whatever feats matter. And so I think that it depends on how you start play. Like if you're going to start playing those kinds of games, that's maybe an easier way. At least the way that I started out and I found it easy. If you're going to do a more narrative based game like World of Darkness, like Fate, like any kinds of games like that, maybe starting with a character concept is definitely easier because the mechanics aren't baked into the game as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? There's no feats in Fate. There's no skills. There's no. I mean,
You have to make up your skills from scratch.
Exactly.
technically.
Yeah,
Your
exactly.
aspects.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We did, and I want to, before we end off, I want to mention. I want to come back to rolling for stats.
Yeah.
So rolling for stats is a thing that can happen in some role-playing games, specifically D20 based role-playing games a lot. Even Cyberpunk, which is a D10 game.
Technically, yes.
You could use a D20, but whatever.
D20 mod 10.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, rolling for stats is a thing that you can do in games where the stats are really important. What do you feel about rolling for stats?
So, for me personally, I think it's a style that you can definitely go for within it. But for right now, at least for me, not one that I use or that I will even allow when I run it with players. For me specifically, my biggest thing with it as well is like I definitely like it. I think there's options with it in terms of variability it provides and kind of that kind of differentiation that you can get within it and what it allows. But there is also the points where when you do that, it is random, and there are times where certain people in your party roll really well and certain people in your party don't. And if that's kind of what you're running, then you end up trying to really, obviously as a DM, I'm not trying to at any point never put them in any real danger. Like obviously I never want to kind of pick it or set it up so like they can't win or that they'll always win. I always try to like to make sure that they have a chance depending on how they do things. And finding that spot can be very difficult when certain people on the team are just objectively stronger than the others due to just they rolled and someone did better than other people.
Yeah.
You end up with people who you go into a scenario and one person is trying to contribute but feels like they can't, while the other person is steamrolling, and if you try to increase the encounter for the better up person, the lower down person just gets further and further pushed down, and if you try to make it easier for them, the first person just starts one-shotting everything, and it's it can get very hard to balance and very
Yes.
hard to manage as a DM, and that's not something that I'm currently down to doing.
Very disheartening for the player who rolled poorly.
Yeah.
I agree for the most part. I think it's high risk, high reward. I
Totally.
think there's something fun about rolling your stats, but also like it could go badly. You could roll super low, you could roll super high, you might not roll as well as other people. Other people might end up with better stats in like your key stat, and that can just be really upsetting because then you don't feel like you're doing as well in your character as you should be.
You're not like living out that fantasy that
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, even when people do stat rolls, they'll allow you to like make one swap or something. So you know, if your like key stat rolled horrendously, you can swap that horrendous roll into a side stat or something. You're allowed to make like one change or something to prevent that from being too bad.
I've also seen people do rolling, and so like let's say you have 6 stats, you just roll 6 times, and you get to put them wherever.
Also
you
a
want.
strategy.
Which tends to be better if you're going to roll for stats. That it lets you, at least gives you some control.
I guess for me as well, like just I guess the main point would be like I don't really have an issue with it as a system. It's just something that me as a DM, I don't want to deal with. So I don't run it, but I don't think it's inherently like bad or anything in any way. I think it just comes down to, I guess, kind of as we were even talking about, I guess, earlier in terms of what you are setting yourself up for as a GM. Like, is that something you're willing to run with for the rest of this campaign? Like,
however long it becomes.
I almost never allow rolling for stats. And I know some people who would say that rolling is better because it increases the amount of variation between characters.
Totally.
I don't think you need to have slightly different numbers to have the variation that you want to have. When we started Cyberpunk Red, I had you guys rolling stats, primarily because in Cyberpunk Red the table of stats are balanced for each specific class. So the stats you get are at least in a vague way appropriate for the class that you're playing.
Totally.
Which is a nice way to do it.
Yeah, but then I let you guys adjust your stats after you figured out what it is your class actually does.
Which was definitely very helpful, as in that example. Like, that was one of the things where I think we looked at, if you actually did point allocation. I think, like some of you guys, like I think, Tyler, you were like 1 above average.
I was like, 1 above,
I was, I think, 6 below
what
my point allocation would have been, because I just, my rolls went bad, and it was, I was just objectively weaker.
And I think that there's like a lot of ways that people come up with. I've read online like, you can so this is like a D20 based game, right? So like you roll 4 D6s and then you take away one of them and re-roll ones, and it's like you're coming up with, in my head it's like you're coming up with all of these ways to mitigate the randomness. Why are you still like, what's the point? Right?
Agreed.
So
I'll see that.
For me as a player, I don't like rolling for stats because I don't like feeling, like you said, I don't like feeling like I'm insanely stronger than everyone else. I don't like feeling that I'm insanely weaker than everyone else. I don't like the idea of, like maybe 3 of us are like gung-ho and then the other person's sitting there doing nothing. I don't like that feeling as a player. Even if I am one of the ones who's doing all the work, it's still not fun for me as that person either.
It's like you can still end up in certain situations where some people are better in certain situations, but then at least like at the end of the day, they have their elements that they're strong in, rather than just like, for this campaign we're all gung-ho because we're strong and we're kind of just stringing you along, even though like you're struggling to kind of keep up with this. I think so I the ideal system for me is point buy in any game. I don't know. I think that Tori, you were leaning towards that. I think. Yeah, definitely. So.
You were,
like,
and how do you feel about that, Sarah? 'Cause I think you were more on the fence.
Yeah, I'm pretty neutral. I like the experience of rolling. I think it's fun to begin a rolling-based game with rolls that feels appropriate, but also the balance is an issue, and you can accomplish the same kind of variation by just taking lower values in certain skills. I think there's like I don't know what it's called, but like when you take a detriment to one in order to boost another.
It's called in Pathfinder you can take like
You can
2
do it.
flaws and then you get a boost.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a nice way to still like let you make things higher than they would otherwise be.
Or
Yeah.
lower.
Yeah,
Very
or lower.
true.
Yeah. To sort of like, differentiate your character. There are other ways to differentiate your character, like feats and stuff. We can talk about more specific system stuff in a different episode if we do like reviews on systems and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too in depth on any specific system here because I don't think that's what this is about. Yeah, I think that kind of summarizes all the stuff we wanted to talk about session zeros.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
About setting expectations, about creating a world together, creating characters together.
Yeah.
That's really important to us, and we've sort of seen the catastrophes that can happen if you don't do those things.
Oh yeah.
We talked about stuff that we like to do during character creation, how it's easier for new players to create characters depending on the type of system that you're running, whether it be narrative or tactical based. And yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us on the episode 7 of Newb Perspectives, and we'll be back next time playing a game, probably, or doing a character creation.
Yeah, hope you guys learned something new about how session 0 works.
Yeah. Bye everybody.
See you around.
Bye.